you were talking about the S&P 500 in the last 10 years, very brutal. We had actually a negative rate of return over the last 10 years, but over the last 15 years, there was over 8% a year. Same with the last 20 years. And by the way, if you look at since the bottom in March of '09, the Standard & Poor's Index has actually appreciated over 60% since the bottom. And that's what was missed by a lot of people who dumped their growth assets at the bottom. They jumped out at the wrong time.
Bill, one of the things I'd like to add is that the U.S. market is not the only place to find growth. There are many other areas. We're just using this S&P 500 as an example, as an index example.
That's correct. Now, Steve, getting back to the problem of making this savings, this pile of money that people have, last throughout their retirement and at the same time protecting it from downturns in the market or inflation. And we've been discussing our retirement income ladder strategy, and we discussed it in general. And we had mentioned we're going to talk about how you customize this strategy for your own situation. And before you decide on a strategy, we feel there are many factors to consider. Let's talk about those factors.
Bill, the first factor that you need to look at when considering this is how much money you should spend. I can't tell you how many times I've met with people. They say, hey, Steve, my goal is to spend my last breath, my last dollar on the same day. And I say, well, that's easy. Give me the day. But in all seriousness, how much should you spend from the retirement? If you spend too much, you're going to have a problem because you're going to run out of money. And if you don't spend enough,
you might not have much fun.
Right.
Yeah. And some people don't have a problem with the not spending enough. Seems like the people who shouldn't be spending do, and the ones who can afford won't. That's why the savers don't become spenders. But a lot of people will say, well, how much can I spend? What should I realistically spend? I was reading an article in the Wall Street Journal a while back, and they were recommending a 60-year-old who had $1 million where they had half in fixed income, half in growth, that they spend at the age of 60 around 4% off that pile of money. In other words, on $1 million, that's only $40,000, and a lot of people have a hard time coming to grips with this.
Right. They think I have $1 million, I can spend $100,000 a year. And if you overspend, you could get yourself in some pretty good trouble there.
Yeah, so, as you age, in the first years, let's say you're looking at a 30-year income stream, I would suggest for no more than 5% in the first decade, say for a 60-year-old retiring. But as you age, and, unfortunately, as we all know, the time frame we got left on the planet gets shorter, you can then spend larger percentages, thus maybe getting into principal into your 80s and 90s. But, people who overspend and start spending 7, 8, 9, 10% in their early stages of retirement, if they have a very short life expectancy, fine. But if they happen to be alive for the next 20 or 30 years, they might be sadly disappointed when they're running out of money in their later years.
Bill, a couple things you want to factor into that. Thing number one is maybe you're going to have your mortgage paid off in a couple of years, or maybe something's going to kick in, like Social Security kicks in a couple of years, and you can factor that into the spending. And the other thing you need to look at is over time, things get more expensive, and most people that have pensions don't have their pension indexed to inflation, so the amount that you're going to have to draw from this is going to grow, and it's going to be a greater percentage, and you need to factor that into your overall plan.
Yeah, that's why, a lot of people, I think one of the common mistakes that investors make in the retirement years, their comment to themselves might be, you know what, this is all I have. I can't afford to lose it. And the one thing they forget is that you can lose purchasing power to inflation. And I've seen examples where people put 100% of their money in bank accounts or guaranteed interest accounts, and inflation can eat their purchasing power alive.
Oh, yeah, it can. So, and Bill, that kind of leads us to the next one, which is your attitude towards or your tolerance towards risk, whether you're a saver or an investor. And we were talking about this earlier. We've met with people that are really savers, and they've kind of been conned into thinking that they're an investor, and they just don't have the tolerance for it.
Yeah, and we've seen that happen many times where people are talked into being an investor, or they look at some returns that are really juicy, and they really don't understand that either that manager was very lucky in that period of time, or they had a very good manager on the fund and just seem to hit it big. A lot of times these great returns are made in funds that didn't have a lot of money in them at the time. They were smaller assets to manage and easier for the manager to handle. So, many people, they just don't understand the risk. But before we get into the, I guess what we're talking about now is the types of risk that the people are comfortable with. I would like to just get back to explaining, how do I test what I can realistically spend? Because, we said in general what you should spend off that, but the way you and I test this for people is we run the retirement income analysis. And that retirement income analysis, we can judge, and we can include inflation into that, figuring out what the budget is, taking a look at the pension income, the Social Security income, and we can combine those with your assets and tell you what you should realistically spend at various rates of return. So there is a way to test it and find out if you're overspending and do some projections into the future. And quite frankly, that's what companies do, and that's what everyone else out there should be doing with their money. So I just wanted to throw that in there. Let's go ahead and talk about, how you figure out what types of risk you're comfortable with. You talked about attitudes, these savers versus investors.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people really are savers. And what you and I have found out, some of our clients can go 100% fixed income because they don't have to get a high rate of return. Because when we ran the test, we figured out at a 4% rate of return or 3%, they don't run out of money. Those are people who really don't have to take a lot of risk.
Yeah, Bill, I think that's a great point, that back testing. I've actually done that. I've shown people the results of the test, and I've noticed them just kind of feel and look more relaxed after looking at that. So I think it's important to define, what type of a person are you, and can you tolerate risk? And then more importantly is, do you have to tolerate that risk? Because oftentimes people will be in investments, and I'll ask them, why are you in that investment? Why are you taking all that risk? And they'll just look at me like, I don't know. The guy at the water cooler said it was a good investment.
Right. So you have to understand what you can realistically tolerate, what your past performance and your experience has been in investing, and find out what the money needs to do. So the other consideration is, how long will you need the income? If you're 60, in general, we plan for 20 to 30 years of income, but it's different for everybody. You want to look at your personal life expectancy. Men generally check out before women.
Mm-hmm.
Women have longer life expectancies, but people are living longer. I looked at a statistic. There are over 2 million people in the United States over the age of 90 today.
Wow.
And there's 73,000 over the age of 100. So we're an aging society. People are living longer. You also want to look at your personal health. We've seen situations where one spouse is 80 or one spouse is 70 and the other spouse is 58.
Mm-hmm.
There's an age difference. There's a likelihood that one of them is going to outlive the other, and it might make sense to create your strategy so it protects the survivor and you make sure the income lasts not just till the elder passes, but till they're both through their life expectancies.
Yeah, Bill, I think that's so important to take a look at that. And part of looking at the testing is we can look at, how long the money is going to last. If your money runs out at your age 82 and you make it to 83, you got a problem. And so that's very, very important to take a look at what is the expectancy there.
Yeah, family heritage goes right along with that. But the main thing that we want to focus in on in figuring out how much we should realistically spend is what rate of return is needed to sustain your lifestyle. If you're already retired and you know what you're spending off of that lump sum right now, what you really should figure out is, okay, what rate of return does the money have to grow at so we don't run out, adjusted for inflation? If you're a few years from retirement or ways from retirement, you need to figure out, okay, based on what I'm currently saving or already have accumulated, what is the rate of return I've got to achieve to maintain or achieve that retirement goal? So once you figure out that rate of return, you have your number. That can help you decide how aggressive or conservative you need to be.
Yeah, Bill, I think that that's kind of like the tell in terms of, what do you need to do to have a successful retirement?
Securities and advisory services offered through National Planning Corporation, NPC. Member FINRA SIPC. A registered investment advisor. Financial independence and NPC are separate and unrelated companies. Discussions are presented for informational purposes only and should not be construed as recommendations or advice.